Adam Friedman, national recruiting analyst for Rivals, here with Panther Lairs, Chris Peak. A lot of news about Pat Narduzzi after the Pitt game this week. Some interesting comments from him, to say the least. You just came from his from his Monday press conference where he addressed those comments. What can you tell us about Coach Narduzzi and just the mindset of the team at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. You knew he was going to comment on it because it became such a social media stir on Saturday night with current players commenting on it, which is never a good thing. Sort of have a bit of an internal beef playing out on social media. You never like to see that. As expected, Narduzzi said that on Sunday he addressed it with the whole team. He had some individual meetings Sunday night and Monday morning. And really, what I took from his press conference on Monday, and he attacked it right on. I mean, he walked out in his opening statement and started talking about it. He showed some humility. He said he messed up. He said, his comments came out. Maybe it wasn't what he intended to say. But later, when he was asked about what he intended, he says, there's no excuses. It doesn't matter what I intended to say. There's no excuses for it. And he said he apologized to the team. He told the team again that he has their back, and he's been pretty steady about that. I think he's been a really loyal coach for the last 9 years. It's funny, just a week ago, he was going through his Monday press conference, almost bending over backwards to justify his players having 13 penalties in a loss at Wake Forest. And so it's funny to go just a few days later and we're talking about him, throwing his players under the bus. I think he knows that he spoke. He misspoke. Probably wasn't what he meant to say, but it's the heat of the moment after a game. I'm not going to excuse it. It's comments you can't make as a coach. You have to have a better filter than that. And Narduzzi didn't in that instance, but it seems like he's largely smoothed it over with his players and apologized, and I think showed a little bit more humility than we've typically seen over the last 9 years.
Yeah, and I want to read the full quote here so that everybody understands what he actually said, because he did say these words. This wasn't something that was fully taken out of context. It says, quote, "I'll go back. As a football coach, you lose a lot of good players from a year ago, and you think as a coach you're going to replace them, and obviously we haven't. Again, it starts with me. I didn't do a good enough job coaching today. Put it on me, and we've got to make plays." So this is really interesting stuff when you think about it from a recruiting angle, because Pat Narduzzi, players really like him, but he's kind of a bristly guy. We've seen that play out in the media with comments on transfers and certain things that happen in games. But how do you think this is going to play out on the recruiting trail? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? How do you think this is going to be how this is going to be taken on the recruiting trail?
Well, it's not a good thing. I don't think there's any way to spin it as a good thing. I think they can avoid it being a bad thing because, as you and I both know, Adam, I mean, recruiting is all about controlling the narrative. People always ask, like, oh, how can Pitt recruit when their attendance is not great? Or how can Pitt recruit when they have a bad season? And I say it's always about narrative. If you're the coach recruiting a kid, you can control what that kid knows or sees. You can send him pictures that only show the full side of the stadium. You can talk about the games that you lost and how you showed improvement of the young players that are getting there. So you can always control the narrative. And if these quotes make it back to recruits, and they will, we could look at Pitt's 2024 recruiting class, and there are some coveted prospects in there that are no doubt going to have these comments sent to them via DM. We know that that's how it works on the recruiting trail. So when that happens and it comes up, you have to control it. You have to say, look, I spoke out of turn. Here's what I really meant. It was in the aftermath. We got beat really bad. We're having a rough season. I got frustrated, and I didn't really mean that about the players, but I didn't really have the presence of mind in that situation to speak as clearly and succinctly as I should, and all of this. It's all about controlling the narrative and making sure it doesn't become a bad thing, which he seems to have done with his current players. And yeah, he's going to have to do it with the recruits because it's going to be sent to those guys. They have a bunch of 4-star kids in this class. And even, a guy like Caleb Holmes, the offensive lineman from Georgia, there's a lot of programs in the country that would like to have him in their class. And sure, somebody's going to say, hey, man, do you want to go play for a guy who says this? So Narduzzi's going to have to control that narrative, just like you do with any bad, any negative storyline. When it comes to recruiting, you have to be in control of it and control what the recruits, how they sort of perceive the information. And so it's a little bit of damage control. I think you could call it that. It's not a good thing, but it doesn't have to become the reason you lose recruits as they move through this cycle.
Yeah, I think he does score points for honesty, and Pat Narduzzi is nothing but honest.
Yes.
But I think also kind of showing that contrition, saying, "Hey, I misspoke, I messed up." and he clearly won his players back over. A lot of those guys who were tweeting about his initial comments deleted those tweets, and I think that will resonate on the recruiting trail. Just that honesty, being upfront with these players, because like you said, there are a lot of good players in Western Pennsylvania right now that Pitt wants to recruit. And in the younger classes as well, we're seeing more and more of them emerge. So it's important for Pat Narduzzi to remember his audience and remember that recruiting is the name of the game here. So you really need to make sure you're not, throwing players under the bus, and making sure that you're protecting them and making sure that you're showing them in the best light possible to maximize their value. We can go on and on about the recruiting strategy here. So, Chris Peak, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate the insight on Pat Narduzzi's comments and the recruiting implications there.
All right. Thanks, Adam.